Welcome everyone to the Speed Chess Championships 2024 semifinals between Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann. The score is 7-3 in the favor of Magnus Carlsen, and we have this 3+1 encounter. It starts off as the Italian and c3 played. Pawn comes up to d6, and now h6 played by black. Rook e1, a6, knight comes out, black castles, knight f1, typical maneuver. Bishop goes back, the knight jumps to g3, and both players make solid developing moves. Rook takes, and Hans pushes his pawn to c4. It does weaken the d4 square, but Hans wants to expand on the queen side now. He has his pawns nicely placed here, and Magnus exchanges off some pieces. Rook comes to b1, and now the idea is to play a4 and b5, gaining further space. Magnus immediately stops it with b5, but he doesn't look very happy with that. Knight jumps into f5. Now this knight is very difficult to be kicked away because g6 would mean that the h6 pawn drops, and also the d4 bishop is attacked. Magnus pushes his pawn to c5, defends the bishop. Let's see how Hans continues. He loves to build up the pressure, and in complex positions, he really unleashes his best chess. Right now, he can expand on the king side with h4, h5. He goes a4. He plays on the queen side. Now, Magnus can take on c4. Yes, he does. B takes c4. And Hans must recapture now. D takes c4, and Magnus takes the b4 pawn as well. So now positionally this looks pretty good for black, because a4 and c4 both are isolated and there's pressure on d6, but it can instantly be resolved with the bishop coming back to c5. I think that's the best move in the position. Also, it prevents white from taking the bishop on d4. Let's see if Magnus Carlsen goes for this or not. He's thinking a bit here. The time is 2 minutes for Magnus, 2 minutes 21 seconds for Hans Niemann. And Magnus is taking his time because there are other possibilities as well. Maybe rook c8 is possible. But, the move bishop c5 kind of solves both the problems of the bishop hanging and the pawn on d6 being loose. But Magnus thinking for a very, very long duration here. Close to a minute. He goes bishop c5 finally. And now Hans can take it here. Take, knight c5. When the black knight would be nicely placed on that square where no one can kick it away. Knight takes d6 is not possible because of rook takes d6. So that is impossible here. Hans is also taking his time in this position. And he takes here. Bishop takes c5. Knight takes c5 and pushes his pawn to a5. Very interesting position here. Because now if queen takes a5, Hans wants to start attacking on the king side. This is such an amazing move because he wants to also put his rook on b6. So this is fantastic chess by Hans Niemann, pushing the pawn to a5 and giving it as a bait to Magnus Carlsen. Let's see if Magnus falls for it. Because after queen takes a5, queen g4 is a pretty strong move, attacking the g7 point, and then you have to push the pawn to g6 when h6 is hanging. So he takes it. Wow, he takes the pawn, and Magnus can now be trouble. Queen g4 attacking here. If g6, knight takes h6 is hanging, so he goes rook g6. He gives a check. King h7 takes. And this is the position we have on the board. Hans Niemann is thinking now what to do. He is now won an exchange. Magnus, instead of going g6, went rook g6, giving up the exchange. And Hans Niemann can now be better. But okay, knight on c5 is strong. King on h7 is pretty safe. and black has the outside passer on the a file. So things are looking pretty decent. He goes queen d1. I like this move a lot. Attacking the pawn on d6. He comes back, and now queen to d5, attacking the rook in the corner of the board. The rook comes to f8, and Magnus can't enter on b7 with the rook because the knight is protecting that square for now. But he can slowly build it up. Rook b2 could be a good move. He goes rook d1, rook comes up and pushes his pawn to h4. Pawn to a5 played, rook jumps in, and now the rook is attacking here. Queen a7 seems like the logical move, but Magnus pushes the pawn. This allows the rooks to be doubled. When the rook gets to b8, there is a checkmate threatened on g8. So these are some of the big possibilities here. Magnus pushes the pawn even further, and now Hans Niemann can go rook b8. That seems like a good plan. He goes queen a8, which is a nice move. And his idea is rook to b8. That is what his plan is. Magnus goes queen f7. But this is the final error of the game. The rook coming to b8 is going to be extremely strong in this position. Yes, he plays rook to b8. g5. And now he's trying to get the king out from here. But h5 is another amazing move. He finds it because queen takes h5. There's check, king g6, queen e8 check, which leads to a winning attack here. It's beautiful how he first gave up the a5 pawn, and now the h5 pawn goes g6 check, king g7. You can see from Magnus's expression, the other rook joins in, that this is game over. He goes to c4. Hans gives a check. King f7 is going to meet with queen e8 mate, and Hans Niemann scores a beautiful win there.